there's a lonely generation out there. They know that they're lonely. They express that they're lonely. They just don't know what to do about being lonely. And the more that we can help them connect, the more that we can help them understand that it's not their fault, that the traumas that they've suffered aren't their fault, that this digital age that we live in is not their fault. When people realize that it's not their fault, they're more likely to ask for help.
Well, welcome to the Generation Youth Podcast. I'm your host, James McLamb. I'm here today with Nathan. How are you doing, my friend?
I am great. Thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm doing well, and I'm excited that we've been able to connect and that we'll be able to record this. Our mutual friend, Brittany, has connected us together and found a lot of synergy. Of course, I was following you long before she actually introduced, so I was grateful that her and Phil and our mutual world of friends were able to connect us together because like minds about seeing youth be their best versions.
Yeah.
I just love connecting with people like that. So, but listen, Nathan, our audience would love to hear about you. They want to know who you are and a little bit about you. And they certainly get tired of hearing James's Southern accent all the time. So if you wouldn't mind, take a couple of minutes and introduce yourselves to the Generation Youth audience.
Can I do it in James's accent or?
Well, it's a sophisticated accent. Not everybody can pull this off with this amount of gravitas that I do. So.
No, it's something that is to be admired. I love it. So my name's Nathan Wray. I am a national speaker. I'm so thankful that I get to do that. I spent 7 years with a nonprofit doing substance use prevention, and I'm a teen mental health first aid instructor. I'm a youth life coach, and I'm an instructor in Not on Tobacco, which is a teen vaping cessation program. So I get to help teens quit vaping and amongst other things. But I was that kid that, just didn't have life together. I had some adverse childhood experiences and I didn't know how to deal with those. And so I turned to substances as a youth. And, whenever I was coping with anything, it would be with alcohol or marijuana or cigarettes. And that became my coping skill for a really long time. And I eventually, grew up, but not matured. I grew up, I got older and ended up getting married. And, it was tough because I wasn't being a husband and a father. And there was a point where my wife pretty much said, you got to figure this out. Figure it out or get out. And I figured it out. It took about a year to figure out, but I got it figured out. And October 23rd was my 21st year of sobriety. And super thankful for that and happy about that. But I get to take a message into the schools where, I talk about connection, I talk about resilience, and I make sure that students know that if they have any trauma in their life, that it's not their fault. And it's just been a really great path to be on. And I'm really thankful that I'm on it and excited for the rest of the journey to see what comes from this.
Nathan, folks that are in our world that have committed their lives to wanting youth to thrive, to really pour into them and help them find their best selves, they're motivated a lot of times by what they see as a problem or an issue that youth are facing and that they feel a unique calling to reach that. So what do you see as that problem, as that issue that you feel based on your experiences, who you have been, who you are, that you're uniquely called to serve?
Yeah, I think there's two major issues. And, when you talk about overcoming adversity to kids, they sometimes they sit in the bleachers and think, well, what kind of adversity do I have? Especially if they've had a pretty fair life. I think everybody has at least one adverse childhood experience, but that's a low number. And so, if they've had one or even, who knows, less than one, they may be sitting in the bleachers thinking, well, how does this apply? How does overcoming adversity apply to me? Because I seem to be doing okay. And I think there's a couple of issues that we have with our youth today. And number one, it's connection. Our youth are not connected in the way that they should be. They're connected to digital devices, but they are not connected to each other. They're not connected to guardians. They're not connected to teachers and any other trusted adult. They just don't have that connection. And that's one of the things that I was really thankful for when I was a kid was that, at the time it seemed like an adverse childhood experience, but I was a military brat. We moved all over the country constantly over and over and over again. But I learned how to connect with people really, really quick. And I could say, hey, I like your shirt or I like your shoes or you have a nice smile. I had no problem saying those things because I knew that it would bring connection. And what I've noticed is that, our students, if they have downtime at school, It's usually they pop open the Chromebook, or if they're allowed to have their phones, they get on their phones, and that's what they're doing. That's how they're connecting. The other issue I think that we have is that guardians and parents have the same issues. We're relieving our stress by coming home and getting on our phones and scrolling through and looking at them and seeing what's new, and maybe trying to deal with our stress and our adversity by finding something funny or finding something that we can relate to. And then when our kids come in and they go, "Hey, mom or dad, do you have a second?" We go, In a minute," and we scroll and we keep scrolling and we don't take the opportunity for that connection. And it's so important that we take that opportunity and start asking open-ended questions to our youth, because without those questions, getting yes or no answers, we're not connecting that way. We're just checking off a box that, hey, I talked to my kid today. So we have to be asking open-ended questions. And James, when you talk about like the vaping issue, or you see that some of the THC numbers are increasing with youth today, it's all stemming from connection. And lack of connection can come from adverse childhood experiences for sure. But there's that other part where our kids just are not connecting with one another.
I love that you started with connection, because we found at Generation Youth that the three major problems that youth self-identify with, two of them are self-image, one of them is purpose and goals, but the second one, in order, they're self-image. The second one is relationships, is what we categorize it, and that's connection. That inability to connect with each other. And you have hit it so distinctly, that it is them responding to this world that we gave them. We gave them this high-tech world that we thought was going to revolutionize the way that they live, and everything was going to be better for them. We had no foresight or no clue what was going to happen, and we gave it to them. And now they're just responding to this without any guidelines, and we're playing catch up, trying to help them. And in a lot of ways, it's not their fault that they're in this position.
No, it's not their fault. And we are, at this time in our life, we are the most disconnected, connected group of people that's ever lived in this world.
Dr. Tim Elmore, I believe he said this quote, that he said that this generation, he's talking about when he said this was Generation Z. He said that they are the most connected generation in the history of the planet, but also the most lonely.
Yeah, they're the loneliest. JAMA just came out with earlier in 2024 and said that, Journal of American Medical Association, they said that between the ages of 16 and 24, the majority of those ages report being chronically lonely.
Yes.
That's an epidemic.
That is an epidemic.
That's a problem.
Well, and the CDC did this study at the fall of the pandemic, which the results came out in 22, that in fall of 2020, and the results came out in early 22, that talked about this very issue, that they report being persistently lonely, and how it affects their relationships, how it affects their viewpoint, how it affects their mental health. So connections is so critical in building those things. And I love what you said on the second one, that we model bad behaviors by relieving stress. Because immediately I thought of this, Nathan. I thought my dad would have, he didn't do this because, obviously we didn't have this. But if he was relieving stress from work, we lived on a farm, so there was no, hey, I'm coming home from work. It was like, hey, work is everywhere. But he would do projects. So I saw him pouring himself into doing something, working, doing something. And I saw that. Oh, the way you release stress is something physical that you do.
Yep.
And I didn't want to work. I didn't want to work. So my way of doing the physical stuff was to do athletic stuff, do sports stuff. But still, that's so different than now. Wow.
Yeah. And and I don't want to be the guy that's like, when I was a kid, but
it's okay. It's okay if we are.
Back in my day, we were outside all the time and active and running around, and playing football at the playground and playing basketball at the basketball courts. We were just always active. And I got an opportunity to go back to one of the Air Force bases that I grew up on, and I got to speak at some schools that were really close to it. And so I took the opportunity to drive over to the neighborhood that I grew up in, and it was 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I remember, being in that neighborhood, and there were kids everywhere. everywhere. You couldn't find a kid. You couldn't find a bicycle outside. You couldn't find a skateboard outside. You couldn't find a ball outside. And it was so eye opening to, they come home from school. Maybe they have homework, maybe they don't. And then they go to their room, they shut their door probably, they get on their Xbox or their PlayStations, and they connect that way. And the reason, one of the things that you said was self image, right? Self image is a major issue. One of the reasons we have that is because when we're walking through the hallways, we're not saying things like, I like your shoes. I like your glasses. You know what? You always have the best smile. We're not saying things like that. We're not saying anything because we don't know how to have conversations.
Yes.
And if we as adults don't start asking open ended questions, and we as adults don't start looking at our own kids and going, I like your smile. Every time you laugh, it just brings me so much joy. If we don't start doing those things, our kids will never do those things.
Mhm. That is so true that we have to be the ones that model it.
Yeah.
There's always an element, and some of them may be our listeners. I hope not. I hope they've learned to, listening to us regularly or watching that, they're beyond this. But there's always an element of parents that are like, this is not really a big issue. These phones and stuff are really good for them. We need to be able to do this. It's going to help them in technology, despite all the evidence coming out now. The research that we've shown that is shown that, hey, it is hurting them in so many different ways. There is that element that still wants to do this. So, how can we convince a parent that this is something they need to address? Because here's what I see. My wife and I went on a date night this past Friday night, went to a nice restaurant, and there were families there. Guess what the kids had that were there? Yeah. Well, the parents were talking and their kids came in with headphones
Yep.
on and their iPads. And I'm
Yep.
like, you're about to drop $40 on a kid's meal and the kid's not even looking up. They're looking at their iPad the whole time.
Yep.
I mean, what's up with this? So how do we
Yeah.
convince them that, I guess it would be like in my generation, convincing my parents not to plop me in front of the television on Saturday mornings, to let me
Right.
watch cartoons, which,
Right.
you know,
Yeah, I know. That was the same thing for me. I think we have to get creative, and I think we have to think outside of the box. And one of the things that all of us experience and all of us have is local businesses. And oftentimes we take our children to local businesses. We might go to the local restaurant, we might go to the local oil change place to get our oil changed, we might go to the gym, whatever that looks like. But if we could take some educational information to those places, to our local businesses, and even as simple as this, you go to a restaurant and you ask them if they will put a laminated card where their menu is, or even put it on their menu. Three open-ended questions that you can ask your kids while you're eating. But
hmm,
we want to give you a way to enjoy your experience with your family and put your cell phones down. We want you to have conversations with your kids, or 10 questions like, if you could go anywhere in the world, where would you go? Something like that, to where if I'm a parent and I'm looking at the menu and I look over and I go, oh, 10 questions here. Let me find out. Let me see where, if they could eat dinner with anybody that's famous, who they would eat with. I mean, if you had restaurants, local restaurants that were doing that, you would open up a lot of conversation. You also open up the opportunity to sell more because they're more aware of what's going on around them. But you open up this conversation to where the families may ask two to three of those questions, and then all of a sudden they're laughing and they're having fun, and then more conversation is opening behind that. So if there were organizations out there, nonprofits, coalitions, stuff like that, that were willing to create this type of system, and then just go to their chamber and go, hey, which restaurants do we have in town that are local?
wow.
And then go talk to them. Hey, one of the things that we have is, and I'm sure you notice it, is that when you go to take somebody's order, they're on the phone. And you have to, then you have to kind of feel bad and be like, excuse me, sorry to bother you. Can I take your order? What if there was
Yeah.
a way to create conversation in your establishment? And we gave it to you. Like, you didn't have to do anything. You don't have to pay for it. We're not advertising, but we just gave it to you. I think that would change the way that our society looks, and it would change the thought process of guardians and parents, that when they go home at night, before they go to bed, you know what? There was that one question that I didn't get to ask tonight. I'm going to ask it before they go to bed. Or you get up in the morning and go, you know what? I thought of some more questions, and on the way to school, I'm going to ask you guys some more fun questions. There's creative ways to think outside of the box, instead of, like, everybody wants to get parents and bring them into You bring them into the school, you sit them down and you go, okay, parents, this is what's going on today. It's not working. You just can't convince the majority of parents to come to those things. But what you can do is you can meet them where they're at. And when you talk about mental health a lot, and I'm probably rambling, but when you talk about mental health, you always say, like, oh, we got to meet them where they are. You got to meet them where they are. You got to meet parents where they are. And if they're in the car, figure out a way, do a radio ad. Go to the radio station and go, hey, we want to do a radio ad, but it's a little different. We want to encourage parents that are driving their kids to school at 6:30 a.m., 7 a.m., 7:30, whatever it is. Ask them this open-ended question. This is our open-ended question of the week. Why not? I mean, parents would engage in that, and the more they do it, the more that opens up conversation. You get to tap into the feelings of your kids, because if one of them is like, well, what made you mad at school today? Well, now I know what your triggers are. Now I understand, and I can help you work through some of those, but now I also get to understand your emotions and what drives you emotionally. And as a parent, if I can do that, you're 900, you're playing chess and everybody else is playing checkers. Like that's just, it's incredible the difference that it makes.
There's two thoughts that came to mind when you were talking. One of them is a blog article that I read. I don't even remember how long ago it was, that talked about the changing marketing aspects of cereal boxes. How in our generations, cereal boxes on the back had engaging stuff, maybe stuff you could cut out off the back or, read and stuff. Now it's more of a QR code, text and a QR code to send them to a site so that they can, pick up the cookies.
Yep.
And when I say cookies, parents to know what I'm talking about. It's the tracking cookies, not an actual cookie.
Yep.
I mean, don't get excited. We're not giving away chocolate chip or macadamia nuts.
No Girl Scout cookies here today.
No Girl Scout cookies there. But that's a different mindset than stuff. The second thing got me kind of excited, and it's a pitch here that you and I might need to follow up on. When you said, hey, do an ad on the way to school, my first thought was, well, how many parents are listening to stuff on the way to school? And then I thought, why isn't it? Maybe there is, but is there a podcast that provides these types of resources for the ride to school? 10 questions that you can do it, engage, that you can have it there.
Let's do it. The James and Nate question show. Let's go for it.
That ignites the next generation, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it just, I don't know. And, with the QR code thing, imagine if you put a QR code in a, a little triangle thing at a restaurant, and you set it on the table and it just said, I dare you to scan me. How many people would scan that thing? So many people. I mean, you want to know what it is, right?
Yes, you do.
So you scan it and it's like, here's 5 questions you can ask your kids if you're eating with them. Or you can even ask yourself. I mean, if you're eating alone, how important is it to ask yourself some open-ended questions? Are you accomplishing what you set out to accomplish today? Oh, okay. Well, no, I'm not. And I know what I need to do. I mean, there's so many beneficial ways to market to parents today.
And being able to teach them and model this connection with them is we're seeing now, with Generation Z moving into the marketplace, the older ones being in their mid to late 20s now, that so many of them do not know how to engage properly when it comes to just simple things like job interviews or connecting with customers or, doing the simple things. And therefore they run away from it. I don't know how to do it. I run away from it. And that connection that goes through, and, you talked about some of them will go through, I didn't have anything that I needed to overcome, that I needed to do. There are a lot of young people. This is a thought I had when you said that. There are a lot of young people that are like that. They've not had that something that they needed to overcome, is something that, they needed to build a resilience for, but they invent it in their mind so that they do not feel left out. They feel like they're a part of the crowd. I had a rough childhood.
Yep.
I knew a young man, his parents are dear friends of mine, and their child, who's 19 now, talks about, I had such a rough life. And his sister, who's older than him, his older sister's like, you did not have anything rough. We had a great, easy child. You're just making this up because you think everybody's supposed to have a mental health issue right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so get over it, kid. You had a great life. Shut up and just move on. Stop blaming the fact that you failed your first class at college on a fictitious thing that's going up there. So that kind
Yeah.
of related to it and kind of takes us off on a tangent, but it's really the connection and showing those things is so powerful.
Yeah, and going back to that, when we don't succeed at life, we tend to blame others for it, and sometimes it is the case, and that yeah, it's our fault. We didn't do what we were supposed to do, and that's our fault. Sometimes though, you have like a helicopter parent that doesn't allow you to experience any adversity because they handle all of it. And
Yeah.
then you become an adult and you're like, this is hard. Now what do I do? Because now I don't know what to do. Somebody else handled this for me for my entire life. And now I'm at college. I'm failing this first class and my mom can't come and take it for me. My dad can't come and take this for me. So I'm just going to quit. That's it. That's what I'll
Hey,
do. I'll just quit.
hey, look, the fall of 2020, I interviewed a college professor about the freshmen coming into class, fall of 2020. How are they responding because of the pandemic? How are they responding? He said that they were not adapting well, that they were struggling. He said, but the parents were worse. And I said, what do you mean, Dr. Parks? And he said that they literally had a mom call their department and said, hey, can you guys provide a wake up call to my child so he can get to class on time? And they were like, are you out of your mind? You want us to... Why can't you call it? Well, he won't answer.
You think he's going to answer for us?
He was like, we just kind of stood there looking at each other. Like, do phones not have alarms on them now? Is there like 100,000 different ways to wake somebody up? Next thing you want to do is you could call us up and say, hey, can y'all send somebody over there to knock on his door and wake him up?
It's so, it's so funny because my kids they'll go, will you wake me up in the morning? And I'll go, no, you're responsible for you. All of my kids they're older now, and they're like, hey, I got to get up super early in the morning, like 8. I got to get up super early in the morning for work. Can you wake me up? No, you set your alarm. You're responsible for that. I am not your alarm clock. And matter of fact, I have stuff to do before 8 o'clock in the morning. So I'm not, listen, my dad would just come in and like flip my bed over. I mean, if I was going to be late for school or something like that, and that wasn't like hey, it's time to get up. You're going to be late. That was a get out of bed. I'm going to work and you better be at school on time. It was never a good thing if my dad had to flip my bed over, like flip me out of bed. Never.
So
That
when
was
you're talking, I'm sorry, when you were
okay.
talking to students and you're talking to them about the importance of developing connection skills and stuff, what are some of the things that you leave them with? I always like to give something to the audience. As parent listening, they're saying, hey, I love to share this with kids. What is step one?
Yeah.
Give me step one. I
Yep.
just want to provide folks with step one. And then in step two, they go to nathanrayspeaks.com and then they can find out the rest of it. But what is step
Yeah.
one? So,
For students to create connection,
yes.
yeah, it's the easiest thing. It's so simple. You take your fist like this and you hold it like this, and as you walk down the hallway, you hold it out for other people to bump it. That's
Ah,
it. That is the number one way to say, hey, I'm open. I'm open to meeting you. I'm open to a conversation, maybe. I'm open to seeing you and valuing you. Like you're available, right?
so if you've done this, if you've given that example, have you gotten feedback from some folks about how it's worked? I mean, the positive, and I imagine some of them got kind of ridiculed, but
yeah.
what's the feedback you got on it?
Yeah, so I pretty much get good feedback. There's some that's like, "Hey, it didn't work out, and I've got to try something else." But
I got beat up today because
yeah,
some
yeah,
kids are.
yeah. Somebody thought I was gonna punch them. Yeah, it's good feedback. So this has happened the other day. Is we had I had this conversation with students, and I said, "Hey, you have to be the ones. You don't have to say anything." But if you want to start the conversation, sometimes that's with a fist bump or a high five, whatever that looks like. And if you just walk down the hall with your hand out up in the air, people are going to want to hit. People are going to just be like, "Oh yeah, high five." Okay, it doesn't matter who you are, where you came from, what you look like. Someone's going to want to high five you. And so a couple of the kids at the school did this. I left the school, came back home, and my inbox, my TikTok inbox, was full of not only did I high five other kids that I didn't know, I felt better. Like
Mm.
I felt better. Like after 2 or 3 people that high fived me, I felt like I was creating something and providing something. And I'm telling, it's as simple as that. And teachers can model this behavior. And I know they don't have a whole lot of time in their lives today, but if they have time to stand outside of their classroom door as their class comes in and fist bumps everybody on their way in, or high fives them, or creates their own handshake, whatever that looks like, you're modeling that behavior. And then the only thing that you do from there is you say, hey, now you go high five somebody else on the way to your next class, or go fist bump somebody else on the way, or go create a handshake with somebody else that you don't know.
Mm.
And you're not only helping students feel valued, you're creating a different type of culture in your school of, we support one another, we see one another, we encourage one another.
I love that. That's a very simple way of doing it. And you talked about teachers. I can picture elementary school teachers doing that quite frequently. You see them high fiving the kids.
Yep.
But as they get older, it may be even more significant and more meaningful to model that behavior to a high school, or especially a middle schooler, because they're such in that awkward transition stage,
Yep.
that they don't know what's going on. They don't know if they're a kid, they don't know if they're a young adult, they don't know what they are,
Yep.
and they're just trying to figure out the world, and the world looks kind of crazy to them. And if they're seeing someone who's coming out of their shell.
The coolest thing for me is, when I go to a high school, I'll try to fist bump everybody on the way in.
Hmm.
Fist bump, high five. I'll try to connect with them in some small way. And there are students that will walk past me and they'll go like this, right? They don't want to fist bump me or high five me, and they definitely don't want to see me. But after the assembly, I make contact with that fist. And there was a school I was at last week in Tennessee. There was a student that came up to me after the assembly and said, "I'm sorry that I didn't fist bump you on the way in, but I don't want to leave without a fist bump."
I love that.
That, like, they recognize how much that little interaction creates connection. And that's I don't have this, like, here's 5 ways that you can communicate. I don't have that. I know what worked for me as a kid, and I'm sharing it with you so that you can create a culture of kindness, so that you can create a
Mm.
culture of resiliency. And if you have that kind of culture in your school, you're going to reduce substance use and violence in your school.
I think a lot of it too is that schools have gotten to be such transitional places. What I mean by that is that there's not consistency with classes, that you're not, unless you're in a small school or a private school, there's not that consistency of the same people all the time. And since there's so many new folks coming in, they're trying to figure out, where do I belong? Who am I? Where's my tribe? And all that kind of things there there's not that unity. I grew up in a very small area. So I went to the same school from kindergarten to 8th grade, basically the same people. I saw just recently, I went to our North Carolina State Fair, ran into my best friend from K through 8, and I hadn't seen him in a long time, and it was like, we're
Yeah.
because we were there, we were still connecting, and we still knew what was going on. And um but I think some of
Yeah.
that has to do with it. They don't feel comfortable. They
Right.
don't feel like they can be who they're supposed to be,
Right.
and they're not willing to be vulnerable like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing as if you got a new job and you went to the factory and there's 100 people at the factory. You don't know any of them. What do you
Mhm.
do at lunch? You go sit by yourself. You don't
Yeah.
know anybody. You're gonna go because you just don't know where you fit in at. And what students don't realize is that that connection, that willingness to connect, everybody can have it. It's not something that's like just too far off and you'll never have it. It's the ability is there. When I moved around a bunch as a kid, I like when I got to middle school, the very first day of my new middle school, I walked into my classroom. It was an English class. I don't remember, uh, Miss Byers, I think it was. I walked into the class and I was pretty much the last one into the class. Class hadn't started yet, and I walked in and I said, "Hey, who rides bikes after school?" And everybody like stopped and was like, "Huh, what?" And I was like, "Who rides bikes after school?" And a couple of kids were like, "Me?" And I was like, "Cool, me too. Can I come ride with you?" Yeah, that's fine. Right. I created, and today's different, right? Who plays Call of Duty after school? Who's going to be online after school? Oh, cool. Can I join? You guys cool if I join you? I'm pretty good. I can join your team. I'm pretty good. Cool, thanks. That connection is there, and so often they ask each other, what's your Instagram? What's your Snap?" Right? Okay, you've created a connection. You can follow through the digital side, but you can ask other questions too.
Yeah.
"Where'd you get that shirt?" "Oh, I like your hair." "Who does your hair?" It's these are simple, basic things. It's not rocket science, and I think that we've overcomplicated it. I think we've overcomplicated it. Like, let's
I think a lot of it has to do with what we talked about earlier is this world we've created
yeah,
with these
yeah,
devices that they feel like they have to have those all the time.
yeah, yeah.
There's now
No,
research that is coming out. I just read it on a Substack site a couple weeks ago, less than a couple weeks ago, that talked about how this tech education, you mentioned Chromebooks, and a lot of schools use Chromebooks or iPads, how that is actually not improving educational outcomes at all. And in some cases, we don't know if there's a causation yet, or if there's a correlation, or if it's just happenstance, but we're
yeah,
seeing the numbers drop as these things are being introduced. Is that a correlation? I don't know. Is it a causation? There's no studies to show that yet, but it is worth questioning.
yeah,
Do we need these things? Is
yeah.
this helping them in the long run? And are we establishing, good behaviors like physical connection, learning to talk to each other, learning to communicate,
Yeah. When I w
especially post pandemic?
Yeah. When I get to teach a class, like a school will have me come in and do like law enforcement against drugs or teen mental health first aid, something like that. When I get to teach a class, especially in middle school, the number one question that I hear when students enter into the classroom is, "Do we need our Chromebooks?" That's the number one question. And if you think about this for a second, if you were worried all day about whether or not you need your Chromebook in class, how focused are you really?
Mm.
Like, I saw something the other day where it said, if you can't leave the room without going back and getting your phone, you have a problem. And what we've done in our schools is, if we've created this culture of, you cannot leave without your Chromebook. You have to have your Chromebook. And if I'm sitting in a classroom where there's a guest speaker, I'm sitting in an assembly where there's a guest speaker, and I did not bring my Chromebook, you want to know what I'm thinking about? I'm thinking about my Chromebook.
Yeah.
Do I need it for the next class? What about fourth period? What about fifth period? Is it still there? Because I left it in the classroom. Did I bring my charger? I don't know if you're on TikTok, but one of the most common videos I see is like teachers making fun of students, and not like making fun of them, but relating that students walk into the classroom and go, "I forgot my Chromebook charger." Because it's a thing that's happening. They're not charging their Chromebooks, they forget their chargers, and then what? Then they're behind. And then the stress of being behind, the worry about where their Chromebook is, whether it'll charge when they get home, where their charger is, all of that is nothing but distraction. It's nothing but distraction. And our kids cannot focus on what's important. They can't.
We're going to have to take a look at where our priorities are as adults and understand this world that we've created for them is not helping them, and reevaluate this stuff
Yep.
and see, look, we got to help them. We were made for relationships. We are relational people.
Yep.
That's we don't live in isolation. We
Nope.
can't. We've learned this, and so we've got to figure out how we can make effective relationships, positive relationships that'll benefit them in the long run, so that they can overcome some of these other obstacles. I
Yep.
believe the three issues of goals and purpose, self-image, and relationships is a more like a Venn diagram. They overlap in so many ways,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so we cannot really tinker with one without it touching the others. So, people say, where do I start on helping them with self-image, or where do I start with helping them, find their purpose and set the goals to do this? And my thing is that you start with what you see in front of you. What's the
Yep.
biggest thing? And if it's connection, that's where you need to be. So
Yep.
I love that. And I love the fist pump idea. So
I'm,
any
I'm-
parting comments to this audience that are like ready to get their kids ready to be connectors?
yeah. So my favorite quote: "Success is not final, failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts." You're not going to be perfect at it. You're not going to have it all figured out at first. And for some kids, it might work. For some, it might not. But don't quit. Don't give up. Keep trying to connect. There's a lonely generation out there. They know that they're lonely. They express that they're lonely. They just don't know what to do about being lonely. And the more that we can help them connect, the more that we can help them understand that it's not their fault, that the traumas that they've suffered aren't their fault, that this digital age that we live in is not their fault. When people realize that it's not their fault, they're more likely to ask for help. When we think it's our fault, we don't want to ask for help because we don't want to deal with consequences. We don't want to deal with ideas of what people might think about us. If we can teach our kids to connect, they are more likely to start asking for help. And in the world that we live in today, we need that. We need our kids to be asking for help. So don't give up, don't quit. And when you think you've got it, you're like, "Oh man, I'm connecting." Don't be satisfied with that. Try something else. Once you found success, move on to the next thing and work on that, because success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Don't give up. Don't quit. Keep trying to connect with your kids.
So, how can our audience connect with you so that they can learn more about what you're doing and benefit from your insights?
Yeah. So NathanRaySpeaks.com. That's my website. And then I'm on TikTok at That Nathan Ray, Instagram at That Nathan Ray.
THAT, that Nathan Ray?
Yeah. THAT. And it's WRAY. There's a silent W at the beginning of Ray. Did I tell you that? Did I tell you that story? Is that why you're laughing? Did I tell you that story?
No, I just no. What's the story? Go ahead.
So my dad traveled a lot when I was a kid, and I'd get in trouble all the time, and he'd have to come home sometimes, and that was never good either. But when I got to become a teenager, high school age, he'd get so mad, and he would go, "You're as useless as the W in our last name," and and as harsh as that sounds, that was his way of saying, "I see you. I love you. I'm giving you a hard time. Get it together." That was just his way of doing it. But I've always remembered that. I've always held on to that.
That's funny.
But it's just it's something with that name, WRAY. That's it.
I love that. I love that. And audience, you can find all the links to connect with Nathan in the show notes. So if you're listening, just go to your favorite podcast app, look in your show notes, you'll find them there. If you're watching on YouTube, you know the drill. Just look straight down. And there is a whole list of stuff down there, and you can click on it, and the link should be live. If not, I don't know what to tell you. Just Google it, or highlight it, and you can search it that way. But they should be live. Figure it out. Come on, people. It's not that hard. It's not that hard to figure it out. So Nathan, thank you for your time. Thank you for your audience for sticking with us. If you've been with us this long, gosh, almost 45 minutes, you found some value in what you're listening to, or you left it on by mistake. Whatever it is, we don't know. But we do have a request. And that is, please like and comment on this episode. But more importantly, there's somebody that that is struggling with this issue, that's struggling with this topic that we talked about of helping their kids find real connection. And so share this episode with them so that they can get the help that they need, that they can see step one on those things. So that's our goal. That's our desire, is for you to share this episode. So thank you, Nathan. Thank you, audience. And we'll see you again very soon on another episode of the Generation Youth Podcast.
Bye-bye.